Good. All right, I'm going to test you guys. I'm going to give you two much more difficult key terms. For these, you can write down the first key term, but if I were you, I'd listen to me first because you do not want to write down all of this. It's way too much. Remember, you want to write down as little as possible while still being able to tell future you what the word means. The first word's augury. You don't want to write down all that if you don't have to. And you don't want to write it down in a way that I wrote it. I wrote that for me. But I'm going to explain it to you, and then you can write it in your notes the way you like. So for now, just write the word augury, and then highlight it with your highlighter, and then put your pencils down and wait. Augury is a very interesting word and an interesting practice. It's interesting because there's not too many times you get to use this really awesome sounding word. We already said that ancient Rome had a very important religion. What kind of religion was it? What's the word that we just used on the last page to describe the amount of gods in their religion?
Polytheism?
It was a polytheistic religion. And in Rome, they wanted to do things that made their gods happy. But that meant they needed ways to figure out what their gods wanted. And I'm telling you right now that one of the practices the Romans used to figure out what their gods wanted is they watched birds. And through a system of watching birds, they thought they could figure out the will of the gods. In fact, the legend that I would tell you for our second lesson of ancient Rome would be how the twin brothers who founded the city actually watched birds to decide where to start the city. And they had such a big argument over the birds that one of the brothers killed the other brother. This tells you that augury is important. I'm going to mute Amy so she can whisper to Emily. There we go. So augury is the practice of watching birds to figure out what the gods wanted. You can put that in your own terms. You could write down bird watching to figure out what God wants. You could write the practice of watching birds to figure out the will of the gods. As long as you're looking at it and you're thinking, will future me see this and understand it, you are fine. Don't write in the definition words you don't know. For example, if you don't know what the word determine means, I'm underlining it now. Should that be in your definition, Amy?
No.
No, of course not. When you're writing the definition for a word, you don't want to put a word in that you don't know. That's not going to help you. Raise your hand if you have any questions about augury. Raise your hand if you are not ready for the next key term. It's always okay to raise your hand. Raise your hand if you are not ready for the next key term. Okay. Once you've finished augury, write down the next key term in your notebook and highlight it, please. The next key term is Vestal Virgins. And then, once again, put your pen and pencil down because this is a complicated one, but it's going to be very important for a later story. If you guys come back and take the ancient Rome topic with me, then we'll get to a story in which you're going to need these words. This is just a demo lesson, so we might not get to the story that has Vestal Virgins and augury, actually, but we'll see. So, as we said, ancient Rome had many gods. One of these gods was a goddess. Goddess means female god, and her name was Vesta. The priestesses of the goddess Vesta, priestesses are female priests. A priest is like someone who is in charge of like sacraments and teaching things about a god. The priestesses of the goddess Vesta were called Vestal Virgins. And their main job was to keep the sacred fire going. I'm going to circle the sacred fire down here in the picture. The sacred fire goes out, Rome is done. This is what they thought. They took their religion very seriously. This wasn't their only job. It was thought that the goddess Vesta could not have male priests, only priestesses. So they had to do all of the rituals, observances, ceremonies that had to do with the goddess Vesta, or any other religious rituals that males were not allowed to do. The Vestal Virgins were in charge of all religious ceremonies that were only for females, only for women to conduct. I'm going to tell you another story. This will help you remember it. Vestal Virgins were not allowed to have boyfriends, not allowed to have husbands, not allowed to have children. And this was very serious. They thought the Vestal Virgins had to dedicate their entire life to being priestesses for the goddess Vesta. They thought they should not distract themselves with any other things. This was so important that what do you think they would do to a Vestal Virgin if the Vestal Virgin had a child or decided to get married or had a boyfriend? What do you think the punishment was?
Death.
Giselle, what do you think?
Get killed.
They would get killed. What's it called when you kill somebody as a punishment? Anyone remember that word? That was a key term once, Jessica and Tim. Starts with an E. E-X.
Expire.
Clear.
Execute.
Right. They would execute them if they decided that they were going to have a child. But they didn't just execute them, Alice. They did something really mean. They would dig a hole in the ground. They would put the Vestal Virgin in the hole in the ground and bury them there while they were still alive and let them sit there in the hole and die of hunger and starvation and thirst. Does this tell you how serious they were about their religious observances and how important their religion was? So being a Vestal Virgin was considered to be very serious, so serious that they could not break the rules. You broke the rules, buried alive. Questions? What do you guys got for me? I'm not going to the next slide till I get a question from somebody. What do you got, Tim?
So the augury, like, he or she only watches birds. Like, does he or she watches other animals?
That's a good question. There was another form of there's another form of augury where it wouldn't involve birds, but there's not a story to go with it. So I just told you about the bird thing. But there was another thing they would do where they would kill a sheep and they would cut open its stomach and pull out the sheep's intestines. And then they would put them in a bowl and look at them. And the intestines were supposed to tell you the will of the gods also. I don't know exactly what they're looking for in the intestines, but I know this is also something they did. That was a good question, Tim. Thanks. Any other questions, guys?
So like for the Vestal Virgins, like do they decide by themselves that they wanted to become like priestesses or?
Another great question, Simona. Nope, they didn't have much of a choice in it. In fact, the story that we would have in our next lesson would talk about a woman who was forced to be a Vestal Virgin and then rebelled and decided she was going to have kids anyway. She actually would claim that she didn't have a husband. She would say that it was a miracle and that one of the gods was the father of her children. But you have to guess, do you think that really the gods were the father of her children, or do you think she was saying that because she didn't want to be buried alive? But no, usually the families of the girls would volunteer them to be Vestal Virgins, and it was actually considered a very high honor to be a Vestal Virgin. So oftentimes the people that were Vestal Virgins, these are not slaves, these are not poor Romans, these are women from some of the richest and most powerful families in Rome who become Vestal Virgins.